theyeshiva.net.
Daf Kufta Zayin Amud Beis. We finished the Mishnah yesterday, the long Mishnah about Rem Gamliel, Pesach Matzah Morer, and the Bechol Dor V'Dor, and the Lefichach, and the Hallel, and the blessing at the end of the Haggada, of saying the Haggada. Amar Rava says, when you tell the story of Yitzias Mitzrayim Tzarech Sheyomer, you have to quote a pasuk. And this pasuk is in Sefer Dvarim, Perek Vav, V'Oisanu Hoitzi Misham. It's, I think, in Parshas V'Eschanan. You tell your child that V'Oisanu Hoitzi Misham, he took us out from there, from Egypt, L'man Havi Oisanu Lasas Lanu Esaris Nishbal Avesenu, to bring us to the land that he swore to give to our forefathers. That's the end of the pasuk. In other words, Rava is bringing a pasuk that you should say that says Va'isanu. He took us out of there, consistent with what the Mishnah said, that B'chol Dor V'Dor Chayev Adam Liroy Sasatz Mekili Yatzim Mitzrayim. That in every generation a person has to experience himself as leaving Egypt. So Rava is giving another source. The Mishnah itself gave us source. Haggada Talavin Chabayemahu Leimer. But Rava adds another source, in addition to what the Mishnah says. Why does Rava have to add another pasuk? What's wrong with the pasuk? Like, why does Rava have to add a second source? So the Mefarshim say, because the first source, you can argue that it's not an obligation for all the generations, because the first source is in Parshas Boy. So Moshe is speaking up to the Jews who left Egypt, and he's saying, "V'Haggada Talavincha b'yomahu leimer." When you go into Eretz Yisrael, you're going to tell your child, when your child is going to ask you, "What are you doing?" Even if he doesn't ask, you'll tell your child, "Mavur za'asa Hashem li b'tzeisim Mitzrayim," and even if it's mashma that you went into Eretz Yisrael, it could still be people who were under 20. I think they were under 20 when they left Egypt. So they didn't die in the desert. So they can actually be part of those who went into Eretz Yisrael. But here, it's in Parshas V'Eschanan. It's the last weeks of Moshe's life. He's talking about people who are going into Eretz Yisrael, the generations in Eretz Yisrael. He speaks about those who get the land. So from here, it's more indicative that he's speaking about the Jews who did not leave Egypt themselves. And also this pasuk is an answer to the question, Ma ha'edes v'achukim v'amishpatim, which is a question throughout all the generations. So it could be that's why Rava adds this pasuk, V'Oisanu Hoitzi Misham, because it's said later in Torah, and it's more proof that it's speaking about later generations, including responding to a question of later generations. So that's why Rava adds this pasuk V'Oisanu Hoitzi Misham.
Chaim, is this a chiyuvus like Arvei Pesachim? Or like if you don't experience it, is that something that you won't be able to eat matzah? Much of Chaim, so that's you don't always experience them.
I guess sometimes maybe the mitzvahs themselves is the way to do it.
But just the fact you're misaper.
Yeah.
Oh, that's already nice.
I think. Amar Rava said, Matzah tzarech lahagbiya. We learned in the Mishnah that you have to explain the reasons for Pesach Matzah Morer. So Rava says, let me tell you how do you do this. You have to actually lift up the matzah and show it to the people when you say, Matzah zu shanu eichlam al shumma. You have to pick up the matzah and show it to the people. And the reason is, the Rashbam says, to show it and to make the mitzvah beloved in their eyes. So you lift up the matzah like to make it more precious, to give it that preciousness. Morer tzarech lahagbiya. When you say morer zeh shanu eichlam al shumma, lift up the morer and show it to yourself and to others. Basar ein tzarech lahagbiya. Yet today, when we say Pesach, the Pesach that they used to eat at the time of the Beis HaMikdash, why would they eat it? Because of the concept of Hashem leaping over their homes. He says, don't lift up the piece of meat, which we call the zraya, the little gargle. Don't lift it up when you explain the Pesach. Why? Because you can't say Pesach zeh shanu oichlem, because this is not the carbon Pesach. It's not like the matzah and the mar. It's the matzah and the mar. Here it's just a commemoration. V'loyoid. Furthermore, not only should you not, you're not allowed to. Ela sheniri ka'oichel kachim b'chutz. If you do pick it up, it may appear as though you're eating a carbon, you're eating a sacrifice, kachim, which are karbonis, outside of the Beis Hamikdash. In other words, if I lift up my little gargle when I explain the mitzvah of a carbon Pesach, it could appear that I'm saying this is the carbon Pesach. In other words, as though this meat was sanctified when it was alive as a carbon Pesach. That means I actually slaughtered karbonis. I slaughtered a carbon outside of the Azara, outside of the Beis HaMikdash, which is absolutely prohibited. And now I'm eating the carbon outside of the Beis HaMikdash. So that is a big problem. So not only shouldn't you, because it's not the Pesach, but it has a wrong appearance. That's what the Rashbam says. Not only can't you say Pesach zeh, but if you pick it up, the Rashbam's words are it looks like, he puts it a little bit different, that you're now saying you sanctified you sanctified your behemoth when it was alive for the carbon Pesach.
Even if it is Korban Pesach, let's say somebody can bring the Korban Pesach today.
No, then you're good. If you bring the carbon Pesach on the Harabayas by the Mizbeach. No, then you don't have to say Achla V'Seinu. Then Pesach Zeh. If you would bring the carbon Pesach today, then you don't have a problem. But Rava is talking about the time they didn't bring the carbon Pesach. There are opinions that you could, that theoretically, you could bring the carbon Pesach today, because the Rambam says that you could be makriv karbonis even without a Beis HaMikdash. As long as you have an altar, and you know where the place of the altar is, so you could sprinkle the blood, you're allowed to be at makriv. And since, if most people are tameh, you're allowed to do it betumah, because tumah hutra betzibur. So then, theoretically, you could be makriv the carbon Pesach bezman hazeh, at least according to many opinions. Throughout history, there were Jews who tried to galvanize awareness and try to bring the carbon Pesach. It never materialized. You had one of the Bali HaTosfos, Rabbeinu Yechiel mi Paris, who tried to do that. Yeah. In our generation, you still have people every Pesach, they try to do it. But the point is that theoretically, according to many poskim, you can do it. Yeah. Even if there's tumah, and even though there's no Beis HaMikdash built.
Haggada couldn't got around this problem by, instead of saying Pesach Zudik, they said Zecher Pesach.
No, we want to explain. So we say Pesach sha'achlu aveseinu bezman shebeis HaMikdash. So Rava says when you do that, don't pick up the piece of meat. Amar Rabbi Acha bar Yaakov, Rabbi Acha, the son of Yaakov, said, fascinating halacha, Summa poter miloimer Haggada. A blind person is exempt from saying the Haggada. We'll see in a moment. Fascinating halacha. He has no mitzvah to tell the story, to say the Haggada. He could, of course, but he's poter, he's exempt. Now let's give the background here. One of the Tanoim, Rabbi Yehuda, has a shita that a blind person is poter from all mitzvahs. That's the view of Rabbi Yehuda, that a summa is not mechuyev in mitzvahs. That's a famous shita of Rabbi Yehuda, Masechta Baba Kama. Rabbi Yaakov is learning it, Daf Pei Zayin, that a summa is poter from all the mitzvahs. However, most of the poskim halachically reject the view of Rabbi Yehuda and believe that generally a blind person is obligated in most mitzvahs of the Torah. The question here is the blind person obligated to tell the story of Yitzias Mitzrayim? That's the chiddush of Rabbi Acha, that even if you believe that a blind person is mechuyev in all the mitzvahs, whether it's tefillin or Shabbos or tzitzis or every other mitzvah, he's poter from saying the Haggada. Why? Listen to his source. Ksiv Hocha. When it comes to the story of Yitzias Mitzrayim, the pasuk says in Parshas Boy, "V'igada talavincha b'yayim ahu leimer." I'm reading the whole pasuk. Ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeisim Mitzrayim. You should tell your son that because of this, Hashem did for me what He did for me when He took me out of Mitzrayim. The literal interpretation of this pasuk, according to Rashi in Chumash, is Ba'avur zeh, because of this. Because of the carbon Pesach, because of the matzah, because of the morer, because of these things, Asa Hashem li, Hashem did so much for me when He took me out of Egypt. all the miracles and all of the salvation. But the term that's used is ba'avur zeh, because of this. Uksiv hasam, it says there, what's there? There is Parshas ki seitze. B'neinu zeh. This son, our son, this son of ours, this son of ours. Malahalan prat l'sumin, afkan prat l'sumin. Just as in that case it excludes the blind, here too the blind are excluded. Now this Gemara is very brief and cryptic. What is the Gemara talking about? The answer is we're talking about the case, you remember what B'nai Nuzah is? The case of a Ben Soyer or Moira, which is that fascinating case in Parshas Ki Seitze, known as a wayward, rebellious child. Ben Soyer or Moira. Soyer is a child who's wayward, he goes off, and Moira is rebellious. What's the case? The Pasuk tells us the scenario, the fascinating and troubling scenario of a young boy in the first months. It's only the first months after he becomes bar mitzvah. The time span of a ben soyer or moyer is extremely limited, right? You can't be a child, a minor. You can't be an adult either. So it's mamish the first few months after bar mitzvah, who steals money from his father, is gluttonous in eating meat, eats enormous amounts of meat, drinks crazy amounts of wine, with a lot of other conditions that the Gemara Masechta Sanhedrin, the Perek Ben Soyer Moira discusses. First, his parents have to speak to him and rebuke him. Then they have to warn him in front of two witnesses. He has to accept the warning and then still betray them. If that happens, you come to Bezdin of 3 judges and there's lashes. If he still continues, so then the parents bring him to a court of 23 people, and if all the conditions are met, he is stoned. He is stoned to death. Now, for the conditions to happen, it is so complicated that the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Ben Soyer Moira lo haya v'lo yiyeh. It never was, it never will be. For example, they have to say, B'neinu zeh Soyer Moira. This son of ours, who is Soyer Moira, einenu shomeya b'koilenu. He's not listening to our voice. So the Gemara learns from this that their voices have to be identical. The voice of the husband, the voice of the wife have to be identical. With another endless conditions. Also, father and mother both want the child to be stoned to death. Right? Okay? If at any moment they say, forget it, it's all over. Okay. Now, when we look at the mitzvah today, this is just in parentheses, it's good to know. It's a very difficult mitzvah to deal with. Even if you say it never happened, it's irrelevant. It never happened, but it's like, you do have to understand though, I don't know if it answers all the questions, but I think it's an important comment that people don't realize. When this was written. Today we look at it and we're like, what? If this was written 3,500 years ago, everybody would go, wow. Why? Because it's hard for us to imagine in America, the 21st century, parents had absolute right over their children. You didn't like your son and you came from a pagan house, you could kill your son without consequences. You could kill your daughter. You could kill your child just like you could kill your slave, just like women were like a piece of real estate. Children were a piece of real estate. You own your child. What the Pasuk was saying was something revolutionary. Your child could be the worst child in the world, stealing all your money, putting your house on fire, destroying your life. There's no such a thing. You decide to kill your child. You're taking your child to a court. There's a system of law. People don't realize the value of putting it in context. That was a revolutionary idea. You don't own your child. It already comes back to the story of the Haggada. Slaughtering your child for a god, everybody did that. Most pagan deities demanded slaughter of children. A god to tell Avram, give me your son, of course, all the gods did that. In this case, God said, and now let me teach you something. Your son is not yours. Your son belongs to me, and I'm telling you to take him and not to kill him. So the point of Ben Soyer murder was, you can't decide to kill your child. Now we think of it, who would want to kill their child? Well, I know some parents. But the point is, we don't even understand the bloody culture that they lived in. So Ben Saira Moira actually represented a major advancement in the culture of the time. Practically speaking, it never happened in Jewish circles because for parents to do this, they got to be insane. And if they were insane, they're disqualified. If a mother to say, kill my child, she's probably a meshugana, right? Or a psychopath, or has some other serious challenges. She's crazy. We have parents who kill their children. We know who they are. I mean, we have those stories in the news. And then they would be disqualified. One of the halachas is, if any one of them is blind, it can't be a ben Saira Meira. Why? Because it says, B'neinu zeh Saira Meira. And zeh, we translate is something that you can point to and say this. But if they can't see, they can say B'neinu zeh. Zeh is an expression like the Gemara says, Mare be'etzboi v'omer zeh. You can point with your finger and say this. But if the person is blind, they're talking about it in abstractions. Even later. So that's the halacha. So that's why he says. It says, B'neinu zeh. So just like over there, when it says zeh, it excludes the blind, says Rabbi. Here by the Haggada, what does it say? V'igad televincha b'yom u'holemer ba'avur zeh. So therefore we say it also excludes the blind. So if somebody is blind, he can't say ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeisim mitzrayim because of this, and therefore he's potter from the Haggada.
Blinds have a very good sense of touch.
Okay, touch, yeah, and smell, yeah, and in fact their other senses are more powerful than the other. So the Meiri teaches the Gemara that the blind person can't say ba'avur zeh for this Pesach, for this matzah, for this maror. Right? Like Rabbi just said, you have to pick it up and show it. But he can't he could pick it up, but he can't point his finger and say this in terms of his own experience. I mean, he could point to other people, but in terms of his own experience, that's how the Meiri explains it. So therefore, the Bacha says, he's potter from saying the Haggada.
Still Chaim in secret Yitzias Mitzrayim. Still Chaim.
No, he's not.
Even that?
Yeah, he's not Chaim. He's potter. He's potter, yeah. He's potter. Yeah. Just like the parents have to be able to point to their finger and say zeh. So here too, we learn out, the Rashbam says it's a gzeira shava, literally zeh zeh. You learn out that it's a gzeira shava, that here too, asuma is potter. Other Rishonim say it's not mamash a gzeira shava, rather, that's what the Chidushi Haran Rabbeinu David says, but just like we see that the Chazal used that zeh to interpret it this way, so here we should also interpret it that way, even without a gzeira shava, but that's what the zeh represents. But this needs Havana. Like, is there a logic here? Is it just, especially if it's not a gzeira shava? It says zeh over there that they can't be blind because they have to say b'neinu zeh. It would be a strange concept that Chazal are comparing saying the Haggada to a ben Saira Meira. I don't know if this is the case, but I'm just going to suggest something that I thought about. Maybe true, maybe not true. Im shagisi Hashem mechape ba'adi. What's the point that they have to have the same voice? What is this, a joke? You and your wife which husband and wife have the same voice? Which makes it impossible. So why are you giving a halacha that's never going to happen? And you make a condition that's impossible, because no husband and wife have the same voice. It's impossible. Theoretically it's possible. So what's the point? The point is, the Gemara says, the reason that the Torah gives us a ben Saira Meira is D'roish v'kabel schar. Learn it and you will receive reward. What type of reward will you receive? Shimshon Rafal Hirsch says you will receive the reward of understanding education. Here is a classic example for this. If a husband and a wife don't share the same voice, you can't call them a ben Saira Meira. If a couple is fragmented, if a couple is fighting, if he has his agenda, she has her agenda, it has nothing to do with the child. Children feed off fragmentation in a marriage. Everybody knows this. And if you don't know this, you have to know this. A husband and a wife who live in different universes and they fight with each other and they could have disagreements, but if they don't reach a common, they will have disagreements. It's a Jewish husband and a Jewish wife, but if they won't reach a place of resolution, of unity, of love, don't call the child a rebellious child. The child is growing up in a home that needs help. The marriage needs help. When there is strife in a marriage, it affects the children. That's the way it is. It's sad, but that's the way it is. So that's a very deep idea in education. But here we see another idea I would suggest they have to be able to see their child. It's not just seeing with your physical eyes. If you don't see your child, don't call the child the Ben Sayer Ramayra. There's parents who have children growing up in their home, but they never looked at them. I don't mean they never looked at them physically. They never looked at them emotionally. They don't know who their child is. They don't tune into them. They don't understand them. They don't see them. If you don't see your daughter, if you don't see your son, if you don't see their heart, their soul, their mind, what they're going through, you can't call them a Ben Sayer Ramayra. They never had somebody to look into them, look in with a real look through real lenses to see what's going on. That's the idea. Oh, so the Gemara is now saying something very deep. The whole point of this Haggada is to tell the story to your child. The only way you can tell the story to your child is if you see your child. If you don't see your child, you can't tell the story to your child. Sometimes we sit down Pesach, we're going to do the Haggada. No. Before you do the Haggada, you have to see your child. You got to tune into the soul of your child. If not, you're not in this position. You just can't do it. So there's no obligation on you. That may be one way of understanding this, because this connection with Ben Sayer Ramayra is a very, very difficult idea. Like Rabbi Yaakov, from all the mitzvahs, he found Ben Sayer Ramayra. Oh, now we're going to do the same thing in the Haggada. But I think that's what he's saying, something very, very profound about education. There's no education without Zeh. If I can't point my finger to my child and say, this is what I'm dealing with, this is who my child is, I can't tell them the story. Which is an extraordinary idea when it comes to chinuch. It's never about me expressing myself. It's about me communicating, not at my child, but to my child. And to communicate to my child, I have to see the person. And I have to see all the parts of the person. My eyes have to be wide open. I can't close my eyes and educate. You don't educate with closed eyes. You educate with open eyes. Sometimes we want to close our eyes. It's more comfortable, but that's not education. I'm living in my own world. My child is living in his world. Now, sometimes it's painful, so we close our eyes because we don't want to see the reality. But that's not chinuch. So you can't say the Haggada. There's no obligation if your eyes are not open.
Rabbi does.
Huh?
We had a born teacher.
Okay. And?
What's the result? You're more afraid of him than of so.
Okay. Sometimes, I think Helen Keller, right? She was blind and deaf, and she said, what's worse than being blind is having eyesight but no vision. She said that's the only thing that's worse than not having eyesight. Says people have eyesight but no vision. So that's part of it.
Was the Ben Sayer and Emor an example to warn people that children shouldn't go down that path? Like in the Midbar, there was a person that was killed from Chaim.
But
did it ever happen again? Was it anybody ever?
It was not easy to get a death penalty in Torah. The Gemara, the Mishnah teaches us in Sanhedrin that a Sanhedrin that killed once in 70 years were called terrorists.
The Torah were meant to warn, to
It was very hard to get the death. It was very hard to get lashes, all the punishments. It was almost impossible. The conditions are crazy. Besides all of these conditions with the parents, just witnesses. You have to have witnesses. They warn you before you do it. They see you doing it. That's not enough. They have to warn you, and then it's not enough that they warn you. They have to tell you the exact consequences in detail, and it's not enough. You have to respond. You have to respond to them that you understood. You have to repeat to them what they said, and then within 3 seconds, you have to do it. And if you do it 10 seconds later, we say, oh, he probably forgot. I mean, it was not, unless you really wanted to get a punishment, it was almost impossible. And if you really wanted, it was probably because you're crazy, which means you also wouldn't get punished. It was very, very difficult to get some of these punishments. But we still need an explanation for the punishments because they are pretty severe. And there were cases they happened. We know that there were cases that happened. So that's what Rabbi teaches us. A summa is patim elomer Haggada because of the bavur zeh. Zog the Gemara, Eini. Here's a fascinating question. Eini, it's not true. Va'ama Mereimar said, Shiltinu l'Rabbanan de Rabbi Yosef. I asked the rabbis, the students of the yeshiva of Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef was blind. So I asked the Rabbanan, the sages, the rabbis who learned by Rabbi Yosef, Man Omar Agadete be Rabbi Yosef. Who said the Haggada? Agadete is the Haggada. Who said the Haggada in the house of Rabbi Yosef on Pesach? Amru, they told me, Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef said the Haggada in his house. Mereima continued, Man Omar Agadete be Rabbi Sheshas. I went to the students of Rabbi Sheshas who did Pesach with him, and I said, who said the Haggada in the house of Rabbi Sheshas? Rabbi Sheshas was also somebody who couldn't see. Amru, they said Rabbi Sheshas. Rabbi Sheshas said the Haggada. But Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshas couldn't see. And if you tell me that Rabbi Acha bar Yaakov is right, that a blind person is exempt from telling the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, how can the students fulfill their obligation of telling the story by listening to the Haggada of Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshas? The klal is that somebody can read the Haggada. You see clearly from this story, not everybody read the Haggada, because then the students should have said, who read? Everybody read. Like in your house, everybody read. That's not what they said. They said Rabbi Yosef read, Rabbi Sheshas read. Now, we have a principle in halacha called Shomeya Ka'ina. If I'm saying the Haggada and you're listening to me, it's as though you yourself are saying the Haggada. Right? Just like by the Megillah, right? One person reads the Megillah. You don't have to say the Megillah. You could listen to the words of the Megillah, and it's as though you yourself said the Megillah. The same is true with Hallel. The same is true with benching. The same is true if it is a Mezuman. The same is true with different brachas. Shomeya Ka'ina. The same is true with the Haggada. I tell the story, you listen, and it's as though you're telling the story. But the klal is, when does Shomeya Ka'ina work? Only if the person doing it is obligated in the mitzvah. If I'm obligated in the mitzvah like you, so by me saying it and you listening to me, it's like you fulfilling the mitzvah. But if I'm not obligated to do the mitzvah and I say it, then you can't fulfill the mitzvah this way. So all the students of Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshas didn't fulfill the mitzvah. Obviously, Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshas wouldn't want that to happen. So this means that Rabbi Acha bar Yaakov is wrong. That they saw themselves as obligated to tell the story, and that's why they could read the Haggada, and everybody could fulfill their obligation through listening to the story of Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshas. Gewaldige question Mereimar asks on Rabbi Acha, the son of Yaakov, showing that both Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshas, both blind and the great experts on these halachas because they experienced it, disagreed with his proposition. So the Gemara says, no. Kasavri Rabbanan, fascinatingly, perhaps Rabbi Acha will tell you, these rabbis, Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshas, believe matzah bizman hazeh de Rabbanan. They hold, unlike many other opinions, that matzah nowadays is also rabbinic. And if matzah is rabbinic, then the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, telling the story, would also be only a rabbinic obligation. Now this is a fascinating view. What does this view believe? The Torah says about the Korban Pesach in Parshas Boy, you should eat the flesh of the Korban Pesach together with matzah and maror. We learned earlier that maror today is the Rabbanon, because you're supposed to eat maror with a Korban Pesach. We don't have a Korban Pesach anymore. There's no mitzvah of maror. Matzah, though, many hold as d'oraisa because the Torah says elsewhere you should eat matzah on the night of Pesach, independent of the Korban Pesach. But you can also argue that since the Torah does say eat the Korban Pesach together with matzah, so it means that the only way you're mechuyev to eat the Korban matzah is if you're eating it with the Korban Pesach. And when the Torah says elsewhere to eat matzah, it doesn't have to specify the obvious that it has to be with the Korban Pesach. According to this, today when you can't be makar of the Korban Pesach, there's no mitzvah to eat maror, but there's also no mitzvah to eat matzah, because the Torah says eat matzah with the Korban Pesach. If you don't have a Korban Pesach, I don't have matzah. Just like today, I don't have a chi of Korban Pesach because I don't have a Beis Hamikdash, I don't have a Mizbeach, right? So I don't have a chiyuv. Honest Rachmana Pater. No, not honest Rachmana Pater. There's no Beis Hamikdash. You need a Beis Hamikdash. No Beis Hamikdash. There's no Korban Pesach.
There is a besondere mitzvah. להגיד...
Well, one second. Very good. Very good. Very good. Okay. So the Gemara Tainas that Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshas hold, perhaps, that matzah bizman hazeh is the Rabbanon. We're going to see many disagree. And the halacha, we say that matzah bizman hazeh is min haTorah, not midirabbanan. Maror is midirabbanan. But this is a view. Now, if there's no chiyuv to eat matzah today, the Gemara is suggesting there's also no chiyuv to tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Why? There's a line in the Haggada, you may remember this, it's a paragraph that's very, not everybody understands it. We start, Yachal me Rosh Chodesh, you remember? Yachal Chodesh means, perhaps we should do all of this on Rosh Chodesh. Why are we waiting till Pesach? Interesting question. You can always say, why do we do it 2 weeks earlier? Sure, it's not enough to do it on Pesach, you have to start okay. Talmud Loimar, Bayoim Hahu, Ve'igada Talavincha Bayoim Hahu. That's Pesach. I Bayoim Hahu, Yachal, Miba'oid Yoim. Do it in the afternoon when you makro the carbon Pesach. Talmud Loimar, Ba'avur Zeh. Ve'igada Talavincha Bayoim Hahu, Ba'avur Zeh, Lo Yamarti Ela B'shah Sheyesh, Matzah umarer manachim lefanach. When do you tell the story? When you could say zeh, bavur zeh, matzah. When is the matzah and marer in front of you? At night. Because you eat the matzah with the carbon pesach and the marer with the carbon pesach. The term doesn't say to eat it by day. You don't eat matzah by day, you eat matzah at night. Be'erev teichel matzahs. If so, what do we see from here? That to tell the story, you need the props. Which props? Matzah and marer. But if matzah and marer are not an obligation min HaTorah, you don't got the props. If you don't got the props, you don't have to tell the story. That would be the view that the Gemara is suggesting for Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshes. Since you don't have the props of matzah and marer, because you don't have the carbon pesach props, I'm using the word props, but you get the point. Since you don't have the physical items, you can't tell the story. In other words, you can't tell the story without the physical illustrations. Doesn't count. A story could never be made up of words. A story has to be made up of actions, right? We don't believe in don't do what I say, don't do what I do, right? We don't believe in that. Do what I say, don't do what I do. You're familiar with that approach. You have to have the matzah and the marer, but you don't have the matzah and the marer because B'nai Torah there's no matzah anymore. So if B'nai Torah there's no matzah anymore, so Sippa Yetzias Mitzrayim is also out. So that means that today there's no mitzvah B'nai Torah to tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. The whole mitzvah is only rabbinic. They say eat matzah, eat marer, and tell the story with the props which are rabbinic, not biblical. That would be a gevaldige chiddush. Another reason for this is the Gemara said before the pasuk calls matzah lechem oini. Why lechem oini? So the Gemara said earlier Pesachim kuf tesvav because lechem sha'oinim alav dvarim harbe. It's the bread on which you declare many words. Oini from the word oina, like oina amen. The bread on which you answer, you declare, you utter many words. In other words, it's the lechem that triggers the oini, the aniyah. If there's no lechem, there's no oini. So these two sources from Chumash might indicate that the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is completely dependent on matzah and marer, and which are dependent on Pesach. And therefore the whole thing would be D'Rabbanan. If that's the case, so Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshes could do the Haggada. Why? Because when they're saying the Haggada, they're not fulfilling a biblical obligation. If they would be trying to fulfill a biblical obligation, it would be a problem because they're potter. So the students wouldn't be yotzei the mitzvah. But since it's only a rabbinic obligation, and if it's a rabbinic obligation, they're equal to the regular person who's not blind. Because the rabbis could obligate them just like a regular person. So therefore, in the Rabbanan mitzvah, the students could be yotzei from Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshes. That's the answer. Kasavri, Rabbanon, matzah bizman hazeh, the Rabbanon. And if it's the Rabbanon, then everything changes. Because the Gemara says the difference between a blind person and a regular person is only when there was a Beis HaMikdash. That everybody was mechuyev midoraisa in Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And the blind person, unfortunately, was exempt. So if Rabbi Yosef lived in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, he couldn't say the Haggada for everybody else. Because they wouldn't fulfill the mitzvah. Why? Because they're obligated biblically, and he's only obligated rabbinically. So there's no Shemei Kaina. But since Bizman Hazeh, everybody is exempt. So when the Chazal made a mitzvah to tell the story, they included everybody equally. So suddenly the person who can't see has now the same status like the regular person. If so, Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshes are obligated with the same mitzvah like their students. If so, they could say the Haggada, the students listen, and Shemei Kaina. So this explains Rabbi Yosef's behavior, it explains Rabbi Sheshes' behavior. Yet, Reb Acha argued with this. Reb Acha said that a summa is potter. Now, Reb Acha didn't live in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. Reb Acha lived after the Churban Beis HaMikdash. So Reb Acha felt that even today, the blind person is potter from sin. Reb Acha is not telling us a halacha about then. He doesn't say it then, he says it for now. So that means Reb Acha Bar Yaakov argues, right? But we did answer the question. Mereimar asked a Gavaldic question. How did Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshes say the Haggada if they're exempt? And the Gemara answered, because it's only midrabanan. If it's only midrabanan, they believe that they could say the Haggada. Attack in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov may be right, and therefore they would not say the Haggada. Today it's only rabbinic. Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov himself, what does he hold? Miklal, what do we see from here? Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov Savar, Matzah Bizman Hazeh Doiraisa. You have to say, Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov holds that matzah today is min HaTorah. So the mitzvah of Sipu Yitzias Mitzrayim is also min HaTorah. And that's why he holds that even today, the blind person is exempt, because it's not a rabbinic mitzvah, it's a biblical mitzvah. And biblically, they're exempt, like he said, Bavur Zeh. Which Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshes would agree with him in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. They just hold that today it's not it's not biblical, it's rabbinic. But he holds even today it's biblical. So if it's biblical, their status didn't change. They're still exempt biblically. And if they're exempt biblically, they can't be Yotzeh, the students with the Haggada. That's what we have to say is the machlaikas, because the mitzvah according to Rabbi Acha continues today too. So the Sipu Yitzias Mitzrayim is today too, and therefore he says that since the blind person can't say Yitzias Mitzrayim because it says Bavur Zeh, so therefore they cannot, Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshes cannot be Monsey their Talmidim with the Haggada. Frag the Gemara, but you can't say this.
Bavur Zeh, if it's in Avis, but there's a pasul and the parents can't say Bavur Zeh if they're...
Yeah.
So how would he answer that? Would you have to say that if it's the Rabban and they could be Eidim?
Yeah. Just like the Chachamim when Mechadash, a new Morer, Zeicher L'Mikdash, they could do this, also Zeicher L'Mikdash. Yeah. It's a new Takana, yeah. Frag the Gemara, Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov da Amar Matzah B'zman Hazeh Rabbanon. It was Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov who is the one who says later in Pesachim Daf Kuf Chav that Matzah B'zman Hazeh Rabbanon. If Rabbi Acha says Matzah B'zman Hazeh Rabbanon, so the Sipu of Yitzias Mitzrayim is also the Rabbanon. So why would Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov argue? If Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov would hold B'zman Hazeh min HaTorah, very geschmack. But he's the one who agrees with this, that Sipu Yitzias Mitzrayim today is midrabanan. If it's midrabanan, so then you could say the rabbis made a takon. The whole takon is midrabanan. If the whole takon is midrabanan, it can include the regular person and the person who can't see in the same way, because it's only rabbinic.
How is matzah only derabanan?
Because it depends on the Karban Pesach.
So it's tied to, so even though there's a pasuk in the Torah,
Yeah.
matzah, it's matzah.
Yeah, even though there's a pasuk be'erev toichlu matzahs, they say that supposed that takes into consideration your knowledge already that it depends on the Karban Pesach, because there's another pasuk that ties them together. V'achlu sabasa balayla azet sliesh al matzahs u'merorim yechlu.
But you have other psukim. You have matzahs tochlu shivas yamim.
Matzahs toichlu shivas yom is not an obligation. You don't have to eat matzah for 7 days. That's if you want to eat bread, you're not allowed to eat chametz. You got to eat matzah. The obligation is only the first night. It says, but one more pasuk, but erev toichlu matzahs. That's the key. But erev toichlu matzahs. They would hold that pasuk is only with the Karban Pesach. If not, you don't have a mitzvah. It's rabbinic in nature.
But you could say, even if it's matzahs tochlu shivas yamim, you could say that's still the right if you're going to do it.
If you're going to do it, but there's no obligation at the Seder to eat matzah. If carbs are not good for me, I don't want any matzah. I won't eat chametz. I won't eat matzah. I'll eat vegetables. I'll eat cucumbers. Answers the Gemara, Kasavar Rabacha holds, called the Tikkun Rabbanon Ke'ein Doiraisa Tikkun. Whenever the rabbis instituted something, they try to model it in the same fashion like Torah modeled it. Therefore, just like in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, the blind person is exempt from saying the Haggada. When the rabbis initiated a new mitzvah after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, they modeled it in the same fashion. So they also said that a blind person doesn't have to say the Haggada. So therefore, Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshes wouldn't be able to say the Haggada because they would not allow their students to fulfill the rabbinic obligation because they're not obligated even rabbinically. So even though the Chachamim were innovative and they were mechadish a chiyuv to tell the story bizman hazeh, they did not include somebody who can't see, because called the tikkun rabbanon ke'ein d'oraisa tikkun. So if that's the case, Rabbi Acha also holds it's rabbinic, but he says even though it's rabbinic, it's not today for a blind person. It's only for a person who could see. Just like then it wasn't for a blind person. And therefore Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshes would actually argue with him. They would say that what? That it is for a blind person. That's why they could say the Haggada. So that's what the Gemara says. According to this, Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshes hold that the rabbis changed the mitzvah. So the Gemara continues, Rabbi Sheshes, Rabbi Yosef, Nami, Havadai, called the Tikkun Rabban and Kein D'oraisa Tikkun. It's obvious that even Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshes would agree with this principle, that when the rabbis made a mitzvah, they tried to follow the model of D'oraisa, because they're not trying to make a new religion. They're trying to, what's the point of all these mitzvahs that they're making? Lulav, take lulav. You have Minat Torah, you only have to shake lulav the first day of Sukkot, outside of the Beis HaMikdash.
Either they make a new religion or
Why do we shake lulav 7 days? Why do we shake lulav 7 days? We never did this. The answer is, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, after the Churban, wanted there should be a memory for the Beis HaMikdash. So that's why he did it. So they always tried to model it according to the mitzvah Minat Torah. So Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshes would agree with this principle. This is a universal principle in Judaism. But here, we see they don't. Because in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, the blind man was exempt, or woman. And these days, the blind person became obligated. Why would the rabbis add a new feature that didn't exist in the mitzvah Minat Torah? Rabbi Acha is right. And yet Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshes disagree. V'haraya, they said the Haggada. And everybody was Yotzei from their Haggada. So we have here a problem.
So maybe it was misunderstanding that the blind person was able
Oh,
to say.
and for the Gemara, we're going to retract our position. We try to reconcile Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshes with Rabbi Acha. We try to say that Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Sheshes really hold like Rabbi Acha in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. But today, their opinion changed, not because their opinion changed, but because the circumstances changed and it's only rabbinic. Mora says, no. There is a fundamental disagreement. Because if they would hold like Rabbi Acha in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, they would hold like him also in the time of exile. Because the rabbis always make their mitzvahs ke'ein d'oraisa like Torah. So you have to say that they are fundamentally in disagreement with Rabbi Acha. They believe that even in the time of the temple, a blind person is obligated with the same mitzvah like everybody else. And therefore today, the blind person is obligated rabbinically like everybody else. Nothing changed. Then it was for everybody, and today it's for everybody. Then it was Minat Torah, today it was Midrabanan. That's what they hold. This would explain why they said the Haggada in their house, because they fundamentally disagree with Rabbi Acha. We have a problem. Rabbi Acha brought us a good source. Zeh. So that's what the Gemara addresses right now. You see, the Gemara skips over this preliminary point. That's how the Gemara works. You have to get to the point. So that's why I gave this introduction. Now the Gemara gets to the point. What's the point? The point is to refute, or at least challenge, Rabbi Acha's foundation. Hachi hashta? Are you comparing Ben Sayer Moira to Yitzias Mitzrayim? Hachi hashta, could you compare? Bishlei Mahasam over there. Midahavalei lemichtav b'nei nuhu. Grammatically, the pasuk could have said, "B'neinu hu Sayer Umayra." Our son, he is a Sayer Umayra. Uksiv b'neinu zeh. Instead, it uses an awkward language. B'neinu zeh. This guy, our son, or our son, this. Shma mina prat l'sumnu da'asa. So that superfluous zeh instead of who is obviously teaching me that we want to exclude a blind parent. Because b'neinu zeh is this child. But here, ilav ba'avur zeh mai lichtav. If not for the zeh, what should it say? You can't say ba'avur hu asa Hashem li b'tzeisim Mitzrayim. That wouldn't work. There's no exchange. There's no substitute for the zeh. So therefore, you can't use the zeh to exclude the blind person. Ella, rather, the pasuk is telling us what we should tell our child, that ba'avur matzah marer hu da'asa. Ba'avur matzah marer hu da'asa. It came for the matzah and the marer. Like Rashi says in Chumash, ba'avur zeh, because of matzah and marer, ba'avur zeh, because of this, asa Hashem li b'tzeisim Mitzrayim. Hashem did what he did for me when he took us out of Mitzrayim. Or as the Rashbam puts it here, ba'avur zeh hu da'asa, that like imagine it would say Zeh before Ba'avur. Zeh, Ba'avur, Sha'asa Hashem li b'tzeis Mitzrayim. I'm doing this because of what Hashem did for me when I took out of Mitzrayim. In other words, Zeh, everything I'm doing, it's not Ba'avur Zeh, because of this, he took me out of Mitzrayim. That's what Rashi says in Chumash. Another way of learning it here is this is what the Rashbam says. Zeh, all of this is Ba'avur, is because of what Hashem did for me when he took me out of Egypt. I'm trying to commemorate Yetzias Mitzrayim. So it has to say Zeh. Zeh is just the natural way of describing what you want to describe, and therefore it's not a pel, it's not a strange thing, and therefore there's no limud prat l'sumen, and therefore they fundamentally disagree with Reb Acha bar Yaakov.
So basically, Reb Acha's bar Yaakov, chekish didn't work. Not every chekish is a chekish.
So that's a good question. So if you look in the Rashbam, the last Rashbam before the Mishnah, you see, Bavur matzah maru dasa, lekach ani oichel matzah maru zeichel mashas lebeteisim b'Mitzrayim. I'm eating matzah maru to commemorate what was done for me when I left Mitzrayim. In other words, zeh, I'm doing all this bavur because of what Hashem did. V'Reb Sheshes v'Reb Yosef gzeir shava loy gamri. A gzeir shava usually is a tradition you heard from your Rebbe. They never got this gzeir shava from their teacher, so therefore they don't have a source to exclude the blind person from mitzvahs yisipur yitzias Mitzrayim. And indeed, that's the halacha. The halacha is that a blind person is chayiv in the mitzvah of the Haggada, not like Rabbi Bar Yosef, but like Rabbi Yosef and Reb Sheshes. So that's what the Rashbam says, that it was a gzeir shava, and they never got this gzeir shava.
Isn't a gzeir shava of something what is a gzeir shava if it's not something that is says halakha you see that it's something that has to come from the original source.
Right.
Is it a halakha Moshe Messini? Or do we just take it out of the sources that we understand? If we don't recognize it, if we never learned that?
Right. So some say that we know that there's certain words that were made for gzeir shavas, but we don't necessarily know what the gzeir shava is. So that's what the Rashbam obviously learns. It was a gzeir shava, and they never heard this gzeir shava, and they don't see a reason to make the gzeir shava, and therefore they rejected it.
It's a word, according to them, it's the words of the gzeir shava. They just don't understand. They didn't receive that.
Right. That's what it seems like. I should just add that the Chidushei Haran and Rabbeinu David say that Reb Acha didn't learn this from a gzeir shava. They don't understand this Gemara as a gzeir shava, because a gzeir shava you can actually learn even if one of the words is not superfluous. A gzeir shava, even if a word is not open, it's not unnecessary, it's not excessive, you could still use a gzeir shava. So therefore, even if you say bavur zeh, it's talking about the matzah and the maror, you would still be able to use it for a gzeir shava. So therefore, there wouldn't be a rejection for Reb Acha here. So therefore, the Ran, the Chidushei Ran and Rabbeinu David, both of these Rishonim don't believe it's a gzeir shava. They hold that Reb Acha just used the Ben Saira Moira as a paradigm, just as a comparison, that just like the word zeh over there excludes the blind, so independently, the word zeh here, the way you have to interpret it is bavur zeh, to exclude the blind. In other words, it's not a gzeir shava zeh, but it's just using the zeh independently here based on what we learn over there. And Reb Sheshes and Rabbi Yosef therefore argue, and they say absolutely not. The zeh here is not superfluous, and there's no need to take the zeh and to put it in that context. It's not like the zeh over there, which is superfluous. That's how the Ran learns that it's not even a concept of a gzeir shava. Maybe to add a little bit, based on what we said before, that Reb Acha bar Yaakov was basically using the zeh ben Saira as an idea that he tried to apply here to the Sipur of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Just like over there, if you can't see your child, you can't declare him a Ben Saira Moira, because you don't see your child. Here also not. And they argue with that, and they say there's no need to propose that chiddush over here. And I should just add that the Meiri, he says a very interesting point. He says, Reb Acha bar Yaakov holds the bavur zeh means you have to point to the matzah and the maror. And because you have to point to the matzah and the maror, therefore a summa can't point, because he can't see. So therefore, he cannot do the Haggada, because you have to be able to point physically to the matzah and the maror. Reb Sheshes and Rabbi Yosef hold, you don't need to be able to physically point to the matzah and the maror. The matzah and the maror are in front of you. You can touch them, like you said. You could lift them up. You feel a blind person's sense of touch is actually more developed than a person who sees. A blind person's sense of smell is more developed. Generally, a blind person's other senses are more acute. We know that because the brain tries to compensate for the void, for the lack. So therefore, when you say, Ba'avur zeh lo yamarti ela b'shashi hashmatzo amar munachim lefanecha. Munachim lefanecha doesn't mean you see it. Munachim lefanecha means it's there. You can touch it. You can pick it up. You can show it to the people. And therefore, you're mekayim the ba'avur zeh. Baya ben sayir amayra b'neinu zeh. They would say means you have to be able to point to your son and say, this is the child. Over there, yeah. He says, Ba'avur zeh here. The concept is you don't have to see the matzah and the maror. You just have to have the matzah and the maror, and you could touch them and you can feel them, and therefore they completely disagree with Reb Acha, and that's where the Gemara concludes. That's why they said the Haggada, it wasn't a problem, even if they hold that today it's rabbinic. It's not an issue because just like Min HaTorah, Summa is obligated rabbinically, also a Summa is obligated, and therefore they could say the Haggada.
According to the Ron and the Haggada, what would you call it? Hamasinu, that we took an idea and we would...
Like a binyanav, yeah, paradigm. Same thing, just different words.
Mara answered the last parish. You could say that there's no Gzeri Shava. Say this over there, you could use another word. But Gzeri Shava is not always the same word.
Oh, so that's what... Right, so in other words, the Gemara's point is that there's no reason to say it here. It's not an extra word.
Right, but it's still the same word. Very Shava doesn't have to have a logic, it's just that the same word. In other words,
How is it different from Hekesh?
so it doesn't matter whether they're there or near, it's not. It's the same word. It's
Right.
still Very Shava.
Yeah.
The Gemara is trying to say that it's not.
Yeah.
Because over there it's
Because here you need the word just to give you the context of the pasuk. Like, don't turn it into a whole source of a new limud. Over there, the word zeh is an awkward word.
right, because it said who.
It shows that b'neinu hu sayrama is actually more fluid.
Therefore you could learn Summa.
So zeh is like,
It's extra.
it's like
It's extra.
It's not superfluous word.
It doesn't belong there.
it doesn't really belong there.
Therefore you could learn it, but here you can't because
Here he says, he says this is the right word to say.
still Gzeri Shava.
Oh, so that's what the Ran asks. He says that the vort is that Reb Acha never had a Gzera Shava. Reb Acha was just using zeh as a paradigm.
So that's what he's saying.
Yeah. And the Rashbam says that they never heard it. So they weren't obligated by it.
Really, it should be a
Yeah. It's Machlokes Rashbam and the Ran. Yeah.
Their show has to come from Moshe Messina.
Right.
You cannot just find the two words.
Stop words together, right?
Say.
Right.
Someone asked by one of the shias, how do they have matzah in the middle? According to this shit, they had no carbon base there, they didn't have to eat matzah. Or wrist.
Right. If there was no carbon Pesach, there's no matzah. There was a carbon Pesach, though, the second year when they left. The first anniversary of Pesach had a carbon Pesach.
All the years they didn't have. Maybe that's the answer.
But that year they had. Why wouldn't they have matzah? You mean because there was no grain? Because there was no grain, you mean? You mean because they were in a desert, there was no grain? Unless they came out with fly hair.
And the man wasn't chumetz either.
No. It says, Sarah Mamaris says that they made on the man a bracha, moitzi lechem and hashemayim.
Interesting. Oh yeah, there was a...
Even though brachas l'chayra came from the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. It's a separate discussion. So the Rameh Mifano writes, Hamoitzi Lachem and Hashemayim. Okay. Rameh Mipano. Rabbeinu Menachem Azaria of Panu, Italy. Fei Aleph Nun Vav.
Sforno also, you hear Sforno, you hear Sforno.
Yeah, Italy, also Italy. Rabbeinu Evadia Sefarno. Yeah, Sparno, yeah.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.